titanium gray S24 Ultra. So let's go ahead and get this out of the box. The first thing you see is that titanium gray back, and when you take that out, that's all you get on the bottom portion of the box. In the smaller box, you get some documentation, a SIM ejector tool, and the USB-C cable. And just like last year, you don't get a power brick in the box. Now let's go ahead and pull the sticker off the front and turn it on. While that's booting up, let's take a closer look at the physical differences between the two devices. For starters, when looking at the back of the devices, outside of the new colors, it's really hard to tell much of a difference at all. Though technically, the cameras on the S24 Ultra do stick out a tiny bit more than the cameras on the S23 Ultra. That said, unless you were holding these side by side, you'd never notice a difference. If you look at the bottom of the devices, you'll see that the S24 Ultra has a slightly more squared off design compared to the S23 Ultra, but it's a very slight difference. That said, the S24 Ultra is slightly wider than the S23 Ultra. So already, that statement seems to be pretty true. Alright, so I finished setting up the S24 Ultra, and I took both phones outside, got a bunch of different pictures of a bunch of different things to really test the different cameras. And if I jump into the gallery app here on both devices, one of the first things I want to show you has to do with shadows. So Samsung said that their shadow erasing feature has improved on the S24 Ultra, and I want to test that. So I took this shadow picture of a phone on both of these. We're going to go to Edit. Then we're going to go to these advanced settings here, tap Object Eraser, and select Erase Shadows on both devices. As you can see, both of them have done an incredible job of completely wiping out the shadow. And if I tap Done here and save the photos, if I zoom in on this, you can see that the S23 Ultra still has some remnants of the shadow showing up through here, and even this part of the wall looks a little bit messed up. But the S24 Ultra did an incredible job completely removing that shadow. It is truly astounding how well this feature works. While both phones did an excellent job of erasing my obvious shadow on top of the phone, the shadow eraser can't erase all shadows. For example, if I try to erase the shadow next to this phone, you'll see that it got other shadows in the frame, but it didn't erase this shadow here. And I think that's because both of these phones are specifically trying to find shadows of you in the shot. This is obviously the shadow of the box, so it's not trying to erase that. Shadow erasing isn't the only thing that received an improvement. The S24 Ultra is also supposed to have an improvement in reflection erasing as well, like when you're taking a picture out a window. But I found that this does still have some limitations. For example, if I zoom in on this photo here, you see that there's a really bright light right behind me. So if I go and edit this, and jump back into the object eraser, and try to erase reflections here, you'll see that bright light stays. You'll see some improvement on the sides and in the darker areas, but anything that's super bright, the reflection eraser doesn't do a terribly good job at. And I think that's primarily because it can't figure out whether that super bright area is actually a reflection or something that's on the other side of the window. If I turn that light off and take a picture again, then jump back into the object eraser and erase reflections now, you'll see that it works much better. And here's the before again, and I want you to really pay attention to this line of the wall up here. If I zoom in a bit, you probably see a little better. So take a look at this. This is the reflection of the wall. And if I go and redo that, you'll see that it fully erases that. But the real question is, does the S24 Ultra erase reflections better than the S23 Ultra? Well, honestly, in person, it's pretty hard to tell. But if you zoom in this area right here, you can see that the reflection of the wall on this building here is erased a little bit better on the S24 Ultra. Is it enough of a difference to want to upgrade to the S24 Ultra just for this feature? No, but it is a little bit of a difference. I also did some quick tests on the zoom capabilities between the two phones. And if I zoom in a bit here, you'll see that the larger letters are a bit more crisp and easier to read on the S24 Ultra, but the smaller lettering is easier to read on the S23 Ultra. Another noticeable difference is in the solid color regions. So on the S24 Ultra, this blue part of the pole is a very solid blue all the way through. But on the S23 Ultra, it's really grainy looking. However, the extra smoothing that's happening on the S24 Ultra does seem to get rid of some of the detail in this black area right here as compared to the S23 Ultra. Now here is a 30 times zoom shot of the same sign. And if I zoom in here, we have pretty much the exact same effect between the two phones. And now we've got a 10 times zoom shot And this is what I'm most interested in here because the Galaxy S24 Ultra got rid of the 10 times optical zoom and instead now has a 5 times optical zoom, but with a 5 times larger sensor. They went from 10 megapixels to 50 megapixels. So let's see how much of a difference there really is when we zoom in. And now that we're zoomed all the way in here, you can see that the two images are pretty similar, but text is definitely easier to read on the S23 Ultra. So even though the S24 Ultra does have more pixels to work with, the 10x optical zoom does seem to be doing a bit of a better job here, especially when you look at the finer details like these rivets right here. But at the end of the day, unless you're going to really zoom in like this on your 10 times zoom shots often, you're really not going to notice too much of a difference between these two cameras. But technically, 10 times zoom shots do still seem to be a bit better on the S23 Ultra. And now we're backed out to 5 times zoom, so let's go ahead and zoom in again here and see what the difference is. As expected, the S24 Ultra does look significantly better here, because at 5 times zoom, that's the optical zoom level of the S23 Ultra's camera. So the S23 Ultra does need a bit of digital zoom to get this far in. And it's clear that it's suffering because of it. If you look at this wall in the back, there's clearly more texture in it on the S24 Ultra. And you can also see a bunch more detail on the ground and even on the mailbox. So now let's take a look at the 3x zoom shot. Zooming in on this shot gives very similar results. For the 2x zoom shots, it looks like the S24 Ultra is a little bit better here. Zooming all the way in on the letter M, you can see that it's got a bit of jagged edges here on the S23 Ultra, but more straight lines on the S24 Ultra. There's also more noise in the photo on the S23 Ultra as compared to the S24 Ultra. For the 1x zoom shot, the S24 Ultra does come ahead here again, especially when I zoom in. You can just see a bit more detail in the crosswalk sign. And lastly, we have a 0.6 times ultra wide shot. And if I zoom in here, it actually looks like we get more detail out of the S23 Ultra, especially when you look at this text here and the details on this box. I also tried taking some selfies with the sun behind me, and both phones performed pretty well. But I think I'm going to need more selfie samples to really see how much of a difference there is between the S24 Ultra and the S23 Ultra. As we've been going through these photos, you might have noticed that the S24 Ultra's photos do seem to be notably brighter and have a significantly higher dynamic range compared to the S23 Ultra. One of the main reasons you're seeing that is the S24 Ultra now previews everything in high dynamic range for any high dynamic range photo, whereas the S23 Ultra did not do that. Now let's take a look at some of the AI features. Let's say you're watching a video from Mr. Mobile and all of a sudden you see he's got this backpack on and you kind of like it. You want to find out what that backpack is. You can swipe in here, hold the home button, and now you can circle or tap anywhere, and that'll use Google to search for that backpack. The next AI feature I want to look at is slow motion video. So right here I have a video that was filmed at 60 frames per second, and if I play this back, I can long press on the screen and it will automatically turn that into a slow motion video. And the way this works is using something called interpolation, where the artificial intelligence tries to figure out what the slow motion would look like based on a regular speed video. And pro tip, if you tap this pencil icon, then move the cursor to wherever you want the slow motion to start, you can tap adjust speed, then select whatever speed you want, and it'll give you a small slow motion section that you can then resize to be however long you'd want. Then if you tap in that section, you can tap this split icon, and split that into 2 separate sections, and those can even have 2 different slow motion speeds. And in case you're wondering, you can't do a third split, so you can only have up to 2 different slow motion parts of a video. Galaxy AI also lets you do some pretty ridiculous things with photos. So in this photo, I've got a Mr. Beast Feastables bar, and honestly, I've never even had one of these before, so I figured I'd want one that's a little bit bigger. So I want to go ahead and tap this pencil icon here. And you'll see this new option here, and if you tap this, you'll be able to do some AI editing. For starters, I can rotate the image a bit, and pay attention to this checker pattern in the background, because you're going to see what happens with that in a moment. Then I can also long press on something, and that'll automatically be cut out, and I can move that around or scale it to make it bigger. And you'll notice that it cut out more than just the Feastables bar and also got my fingers. If something like that happens, you can undo that. Maybe take out your S Pen, zoom in on the image, then draw around the Feastables bar with the S Pen. Now I can zoom back out. I can long press that and drag that out and make it a little bit bigger. And when I get that right, I'll go ahead and tap Generate. And after about 10 seconds, I'll have the updated image. And you'll notice that that checker pattern was filled in with AI. None of these details in the corner actually existed in real life. And when I tap Done, even the Feastables bar gets a boost in resolution. So if I zoom in on this, you'll see that that is a far higher resolution than it was originally. But one important thing to note when making these AI-generated images is that once you save them, Samsung adds a little watermark to the bottom left corner, letting people know that this was an AI-generated image. Samsung also changes the metadata within the image to make that clear as well. If we jump into Settings, then scroll down to Advanced Features, then go to Advanced Intelligence, you'll be able to see all of the AI features on one page, as well as descriptions of what those features do. And if you tap on one of them, you'll get even more information about it. But what I really want to point out is at the bottom of this Advanced Intelligence page, and it's this option here to process data only on the device. If you do this, all the AI features will be processed directly on the phone, and nothing will be pushed online for processing. However, if you do this, you will get some limitations on what you can and can't use in terms of AI features. For AI features that you lose by not allowing them to be processed online, you won't be able to use the Samsung Notes features that allow you to auto-format, summarize, or auto-correct your spelling. But the translation features will still work in Samsung Notes. Another thing that's not available without online processing is creating summaries from transcripts or any notes or websites. And lastly, the generative fill and AI photo editing features that I showed you guys a bit earlier will be unavailable as well. But the rest of these AI features will be available with local processing only. Since the S24 Ultra now has a much more flat display compared to the S23 Ultra, let's test how well the S Pen works along the edges of the screen. So I'm going to go ahead and just start drawing along the edge and seeing if my S Pen, wow, that's actually a whole lot easier to draw along the edges. Because if I do this on my S23 Ultra, the S Pen's just going to roll off that curve a lot more easily. So it's still possible to draw along the edges, but especially as I get to right about here, the S Pen, you can see it just kind of rolls off to the side. So you really can't get that close to the edges on the S23 Ultra compared to the S24 Ultra. Now, to be honest, you're probably not going to need to use the S Pen at the very edges of the screen terribly often, but having that flat display does make it a better experience. As I was going through the camera modes, I noticed that the 8K video recording option now lets you record at not just 1x zoom, but 1x and 5x zoom, because the 5x zoom camera on the S24 Ultra is now a 50 megapixel camera instead of the 10 megapixel camera that was on the S23 Ultra. And in order to film an 8K video, you need at least 32 megapixels. So obviously, the zoom lens on the S23 Ultra just couldn't do 8K video. Although I did notice one limitation here. If you start recording a video at 5x zoom in 8K, you can't go wider than 5x, but you can digitally zoom out to a 10x zoom. And if you started at a 1x zoom, you'd only be able to zoom out to 5x, but it wouldn't actually switch lenses, or let you zoom anywhere past 5x. Previously, you could only record at the 1x zoom, and you could do a digital zoom up to 6x. Something else I noticed in the camera app is that if you go to the More section, you'll see that the super slow motion mode that was previously available on the S23 Ultra is no longer available here. However, that mode actually has an improvement, and it's found in slow motion. So if you change your slow motion mode to full HD at 240 frames per second, then record a video, you'll be able to create a 960 frame per second video from that video, just like you were with the super slow-mo mode. The only difference is that you no longer have a 1 second time limit like you did before. Now you can create a 960 frame per second video for as long as you want. So here's a 240 frame per second video I filmed with the S24 Ultra. And if I go ahead and skip forward a little bit here to where the pen drops and long press on the screen, you'll see that it slows a ton down to 960 frames per second. So now let's see what that looks like with the super slow-mo mode on the S23 Ultra. If I play this back, you'll see that the pen flipping looks almost identical to what it looked like on the S24 Ultra. The only difference is the S23 Ultra is limited to about 1 second of recording at this speed, but now you can record as long as you want on the S24 Ultra. If you switch to regular video mode, then change the resolution to UHD at 60 frames per second, something you'll notice is that when you start recording on the S23 Ultra, you're going to get locked into this one lens. But on the S24 Ultra, if I start recording here, I can actually switch through all the different lenses while I'm recording. Alright, so I'm back with a full day's worth of use out of both the S23 Ultra and the S24 Ultra, and the battery life is pretty comparable here. You can see that after 4 hours and 19 minutes on the S23 Ultra, I've got about 73% of my battery life left, and at just under 4 hours, I've got 74% left on the S24 Ultra. Now keep in mind, this is my first day with the S24 Ultra, and I spent most of the day using the camera app to take photos and videos and run a bunch of tests for future videos. So the phone hasn't had time yet to learn any usage patterns, and once it does, I'll get a little bit of an increase in battery life. But it's good to see that even on the first day, it has comparable battery life to the S23 Ultra. Another thing I want to point out after a full day of use with the S24 Ultra is that the new frame is actually a bit easier to grip compared to the S23 Ultra's frame. I used this all day without a case on it, taking a bunch of different pictures in and out of pockets, and I did feel like I had a pretty secure grip on this phone. So while initially I wasn't sure if it'd make too much of a difference, after a full day I can say that it was actually a notable difference. That's it for this tech episode. God bless, guys, and I'll catch you in the next one.